back to the poem, Professor Madsen remarked in his poem on deafness the following sentiments. What is it like to be deaf and alone, in the company of those who can hear? And you only guess as you go along, for no one's there with a helping hand. As you try to keep up with working song, you have to be deaf to understand. What is it like to hear a hand? Yes, you have to be deaf to understand. I would like to introduce Helena Ryan with her speech titled, Hear a Hand.
It's frustrating, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I'm speaking to you in a language, the deaf language. It's sign language. But you couldn't respond because you couldn't understand me. Well, I was a teacher for the deaf. And I often interpreted for people like you, hearies. Those are people that can hear and talk. So let me interpret for you this morning. Good morning. My name is Mrs. Ryan. What is your name? And you can respond. Because you understand what I've said. I used your language plus my language. Communication is so important for all of us, isn't it? It's what we use to understand one another. It's what we use to connect with one another. It's what we use to value one another. So come into my world of silence and let's examine what isolation, what prejudices, and what social behaviors, how they affect a deaf person. Isolation. Have you ever been in a goldfish bowl where you can see everything, you're observing, but you're behind glass. You can't be involved. That's how a lot of deaf people feel. I remember I was going to a restaurant once, and they had fish tanks all along the side. As you walked in, that's how you kept you in line. And there was a little boy there that was signing to his father about the fish. Well, whether they knew it or not, the rest of the people in line were sort of taken back, sort of peering and pointing. Whether they knew it or not, they were isolating that little boy. So I stood up, walked over to it, and said, "What fish do you like?"
Oh, wow.
Wow. He looked at me like I had just lit the world on fire. I used his language. What would you have done? Because sometimes, couldn't you have gotten down on his level, pointed at the fish, and even made up your own sign? Prejudices. We all have them, don't we? Well, I learned a big lesson from a little girl. She was deaf-blind. She was a student of mine, and her name was Jana. And I had Jana over to my house on a Saturday. And she was sitting at my dining room table, and she had a piece of paper about this size, and she had a pencil. And when I went over to see what she had drawn, she had actually drawn my dining room, my kitchen, and my laundry room, to scale, freehand on a piece of paper. Now that is amazing. I don't know about you, but I can't draw a stick figure. I had limited in my mind what she was able to do. Don't we do that sometimes? Limit people. Social behavior. We all like cliques, don't we? Because we like to be in our safe zone. I was teaching a deaf class in a hearing elementary school. We were supposed to be mainstreaming the students. And one day after recess, when all the kids had been together, a student named Sean, who was 10 years of age, came up to my desk, tapped his hand on my desk so I'd be attentive and said, "Why me?" I knew exactly what he was saying. He was the cutest, the smartest, the most athletic kid in the whole school. But he was isolated by behaviors. You know, whether we know it or not, when you're standing over talking about somebody, even if you're saying they're the greatest person on the earth, our social behaviors sometimes isolate people. So this morning, as you peered into the world of silence, think about it. Help me break those barriers of isolation, prejudice, and some of our social behaviors. Remember, deaf people, they're just like you and me. They have dreams, they have fears, they have hopes. And when you're with your hearing people, don't you use facial expressions? Don't you use body language like Michelle does? Don't you use gestures? Well, remember, a deaf person is just like you, but they have a different language. So remember, they hear your facial expressions. They hear your body language. And they hear your hands.